Afternoon, everybody. As Sam said, I'm Richard O'Brien, the Adobe Principal Technologist here at QA. And the aim of this fairly short session, kind of 45 minutes or so, is just to clear up some of the myths about the Adobe Creative Cloud system that Adobe have kind of released, as it were, this year. And also to show you just some of the new features of some of the products. The three that we've chosen for this are probably our three most popular products, which are Photoshop, InDesign, and Illustrator. Obviously, in 45 minutes, we can't go through every product, nor can we go through every new feature of every product, but it is just to show you kind of some of the nice ones that are there, and as I say, to clear up some of the common questions that are arising around Creative Cloud. So we'll get started and see how we go. There's been a lot of discussion online in particular about what Creative Cloud actually is. And in short, it's a subscription-based suite of products. So rather than purchasing the software and then having to upgrade, every 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, however often it is you decide to upgrade, rather than that, we pay a monthly subscription fee. And then for that, you're currently always given the latest version of the software. So as soon as Adobe release updates, you don't have to wait, another 18 months or anything like that. You get the updates as soon as Adobe release them. They've already released a number of updates for all of the products. So even just a few months down the line, there's been a few changes already. Now, not only do you get kind of the traditional Creative Suite products, such as it were, but you also get access to lots of other products that used to cost extra. Some are new products entirely. So things like Adobe InCopy, Adobe Photoshop Lightroom, Muse, Edge, the Digital Publishing Suite, all sorts of other things that you get access to, lots of new systems, as it were, new services. So you'll get access to things like Behance, which is a portfolio system that Adobe purchased towards the end of last year. You'll get things like Photoshop Touch for tablets, iPads, Typekit for web fonts, Business Catalyst, which is a whole set of tools for online website management, hosting. And as you can see there as well, you're always automatically given 20 gigabytes of online storage, not only to let you share your files and store them in kind of the traditional sense, but also to share them with maybe clients who don't have perhaps the Creative Suite, and they get certain degrees of interactivity and things like that. So that's kind of what you get, as it were, with Creative Cloud. And as I said, obviously that's potentially changing all the time. Lightroom initially wasn't part of Creative Cloud, and they brought that in very, very quickly. So there's lots of new stuff being added on a fairly regular basis. Now, the big question I think that most people are asking is, how much does this cost? That does vary slightly depending potentially on which country you're in. It also depends on which version of the original Creative Suite, as it were, you have. So these are some of the sample prices that Adobe are publishing at the moment. So for an individual user, if you're an existing Creative Suite user, you're looking at around £27 a month. And for that, you get the full suite and all of the extra things as well, like Lightroom and Behance and Edge and Business Catalyst and everything. So you get more than you used to get with the old Creative Suite for £27 a month. They've also got a subscription system available called Creative Cloud Teams, or for Teams, and that supports kind of 100-ish users, something like that. It can go beyond that, and that's about £38 per person per month at the moment. If you're a brand new user, never had the Creative Suite at all, then you're looking at £46 per person, again for everything. And again, obviously slightly more for a Teams subscription. Now, at Photoshop World in September, Adobe announced something called the Photoshop Photography Program, and for that you get Photoshop, Lightroom, Behance, and again some various other bits for less than £9 a month for an existing user. So all of Photoshop, all of Lightroom, doesn't even cost you a tenner. So that's kind of the sorts of costs that you're potentially looking at the moment. No doubt over time that's going to change. You know, it could go up, it could go down, I suppose, if we're really lucky. But that's kind of the sorts of costs you're talking about. So how cost effective it is for some people and for some organizations is obviously going to vary depending on how often do you upgrade normally. If you're the sort of person who upgrades, or the sort of organization who upgrades maybe every version, then it's probably an absolute bargain. If you maybe upgrade once every 4 or 5 versions, rephrase that. If you upgrade every single version, it's probably not quite the bargain that it is if you upgrade every 4 or 5 versions. But that's kind of the sorts of prices that you see. Now, the nice thing with Creative Cloud is that you don't actually have to subscribe to the entire suite if you don't want to. So if you decide that you actually only need one of the applications, for sample purposes here, I've mentioned Illustrator, but any of the individual products, that's just over £17.5 a month, or from that price. If you need to add an extra application, maybe for part of a project, something like that, then you can add an extra product just for a month or two, as long as you require it, and then ditch that product, and obviously then stop paying for it when it's no longer required. So this is quite nice. It does mean that I don't have to buy all of the products when I need them. I can just buy the individual product when it's required, stop paying for it when it's not. And I think that's quite a nice flexible way maybe of working, whereas in the past you'd perhaps have to buy either all of the products, even though they might not always be needed. You might have to buy the entire suite, despite the fact you didn't perhaps actually want it all. And certainly these days, even if you didn't want all the suite, at the sorts of prices they're talking about, it's still probably quite a bargain to get. And again, I've mentioned there, because it's so been recently newly announced, the Photoshop Photography Program. Again, under a tenner. So you don't have to have all the products, which is again quite a nice idea. What it isn't, and this is where there's been a lot of misinformation online, and that's probably because of its name. They are not cloud-based applications. You need internet access to download the application and to install it. But once it's installed, you don't need internet access. So it runs locally from the machine, just as software has kind of traditionally always done. You don't need to be online all the time, but you do need to be online periodically so that it can check that your subscription is still valid. And typically that's around about every 30 days that it will do that. So you've only got to go online once every 30 days, which in this day and age is probably going to happen, just for it to verify a subscription. And even if it can't verify your subscription, you'll typically get either 2 or 3 month kind of grace period, as it were, before the software will completely stop working. So, as I say, that's where there's been a lot of misinformation that you need to be online all the time, that it's going to run in a browser. Lots of people have been worried about the sorts of performance that you might get from it. But in fact, you're going to get the same performance you've always got because it's installed locally and runs locally. So that's what it's not. So what I'm going to do for kind of the next 3 slides, as it were, of this short presentation, is just show you some of the new features that the products have got. Because, as I say, there are a lot of new features in some of the products. Some of the products, they are maybe kind of little tweaks, little refinements, enhancements. Some of the other products, they are very big changes. And because of the nature of them, obviously, I can't show you every single new feature and every single change. So what I've done is I've picked out from Photoshop, InDesign and Illustrator, three of the perhaps more popular things, the changes that Adobe have incorporated, and that's popular either in terms of their kind of big features, or they're popular in that when people have actually seen these, they've been the features that have kind of really got people excited about what CC, as they're calling it, brings. So for Photoshop, these are kind of three of the more popular ones that have been kind of announced and that are included as part of Photoshop CC. So Camera Raw, all the editing that Camera Raw gives, the power that Camera Raw gives, the non-destructive editing that Camera Raw gives, are now available as a smart filter. So it can be edited directly within the Photoshop file itself, whereas historically you had to do any camera editing before you brought it into Photoshop. Now, once it's in, you can still go back into Camera Raw and work on it. And you've got lots of new changes within Camera Raw itself, whether it's running as a smart filter or not. They've enhanced the traditional kind of resizing algorithms that Photoshop's had for obviously, ages. They've brought in a brand new resizing algorithm, which on the whole seems to be very, very good. So I'm going to show you that one. And then one I'm going to show you, which is one of the recent ones that's been added in to CC since it was released. So this idea of they'll release new features as and when they're ready, rather than having to wait, is something called Generator, which is a great tool for generating any assets. So if you're using Photoshop to produce, the example I'm going to use is maybe something like a web page design, kind of a mock-up of a web page. That can all be designed in Photoshop, and then Photoshop can generate all of the images that are going to be required, and it does it on the fly as needed. And they're just kind of three of the popular features, but there's lots and lots of other things. So you'll get your ability to import your presets from your older versions if need be. All of the products now have a sync settings command. So things like your preferences, your swatches, your shapes, your actions, things like that can be stored actually in the cloud itself. So if you happen to use the software on more than one machine, then your settings are with you all the time. And of course, as part of Creative Cloud itself, regardless of software, you get licenses to install it on two devices at once. So that could be two PCs, it could be two Macs, it could be one of each. So effectively you get two licenses. So being able to store your settings in the cloud becomes really, really nice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over into Photoshop, and I'm just going to show you kind of these three new features, just to kind of give you a taste of some of the stuff that's new. As I say, there's a lot of new stuff. So I'm just going to switch over into Photoshop now and show you some of these new features. It says and accidentally switches into Illustrator. Apologies. So here we are. This is Photoshop CC. I've got a couple of files open at the moment. If you've come through, or if you've seen CS6, then this will look fairly familiar. From the earlier version, it probably looks quite a bit different because of the new interface and so on. But kind of that aside, just kind of one thing I'd like to point out is just down in the corner of my screen here, this little cog. This is for my sync settings, and this is going to tell Photoshop to sync all my swatches and things like that back up to the Creative Cloud. So I've got them, which is great. I typically work on a couple of machines, so at least I know if I customize Photoshop on one of them, I know I've got those settings on another one. I don't have to go and do it all again, which is, for me, it's a real big thing. Although it's a tiny feature, it's a big thing in terms of changing how I work. So to show you one of the new features that Photoshop CC brings, what I've got here is just kind of a standard image, which I'm going to resize. Something we traditionally would do all the time, do it on a regular basis. So this is the new image size dialog box. As we can see, it's a very small image, 510 pixels by 768, 72 ppi resolution, so quite a kind of a low res image. automatically given a preview on the side here, which as you can see, I can increase and decrease the size of that preview just to help me get a better feel for how the resized image might look. And what I get here now is I get a drop-down list of some pre-built resolutions that I might want to resize this image to. Notice down the bottom there I can load and save presets as well, which can be massively useful indeed. But I'm going to resize to a particular size because of something I want to do with this as part of the next bit of the demo. So I'm going to resize this image to 2000 by 4000 pixels at 240 ppi. And obviously you can see here, this looks a little fuzzy, a little blurry at the resolution that I'm going to be in at. But I am zoomed in very, very closely, as you can see. Now, just to kind of give you an example of how Photoshop CC is making perhaps quite a really nice job of this resizing. Here I've got my resizing algorithms kind of as I've always had. And you can see that if I switch between them, there can be quite a difference in terms of the end result. So what I've done is I've left it on the automatic. I've let Photoshop just do its own thing and see what it's going to come up with. Because what Adobe is saying with this automatic algorithm is it will try to select the best resizing algorithm there is based on what you've asked it to do in the settings above. So I'm going to OK it and set it going, because obviously it could take 2 or 3 moments to run. Especially given I've got InDesign and Illustrator and other things running at the moment. But okay, there we go. That's done. That's not done a bad job. That's not taken it long at all. And as you can see, if I zoom around this, there's not a lot wrong with that, given that it was such a small file in the first place, and it's now quite a large file. I'm just going to zoom out to kind of full screen so we can see it, and there it is, kind of full screen, and we can see that it has indeed, gone up drastically in terms of its size. But overall, to look at, that doesn't look bad at all, just for letting Photoshop do its own thing. So that kind of gives you an example of one of the new things. In this case, it's the resizing algorithm. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take this image now and drop it into the other file that I've got open to show you just a couple of the other things that the Photoshop CC brings. So let me take this over into here. I'm just going to drop it in, and I'm just going to move it down the layer stack. So the first thing I might want to do now, having got this image in here, is I may now decide that maybe the image itself perhaps needs a little bit of working on. And obviously I've got all my traditional tools for doing that. But one of the things that is kind of a big new feature is the ability to take any layer and, if need be, work on it using the power that Camera Raw gives, but directly within Photoshop without actually having to leave Photoshop itself. Now, it's like most of the filters these days. If I just use it as it stands, then effectively that becomes destructive to a point. But I can, of course, convert it for smart filters. And that now means that if I decide to change my mind later, I can just jump back into Camera Raw and refine the work I've already done. So in the filter menu here, I'm just going to open up the Camera Raw filter. This is a fairly decent sized file now, so it may take it a moment. But as you can see here, I've now got the standard Camera Raw interface, and I can now come in and I can do any work that I feel needs doing using the power that Camera Raw gives me. But I kind of actually haven't left Photoshop. One thing that I'm just going to show you, because it's a really nice feature, I think it's something that's kind of long overdue, perhaps, in a way, is the new adjustment brush, and then the spot removal tool that I've got here. And traditionally, you would go in and you could just drop a circle to fix anything, which I can do like so, and that's obviously been fixed, as you can see. But one of the things they've brought in is the ability to kind of paint any corrections that you need to make. So rather than if I want to get rid of this little patch here, rather than just create a great big circle or 2 or 3 circles, I can actually now just paint across those and let Camera Raw kind of deal with that. And really nicely is this new visualize spots feature to help me see kind of any blemishes in the image that I might have otherwise missed. Let's just go and fix that one. Let's just kind of quickly remove that one just for demo purposes, really. So I'm just going to OK that, and that's going to apply all those Camera Raw changes direct to my image, and you can see here it's been added in. But notice it's got its own layer mask, so I can go in and I can paint out any of those changes if I don't agree. There's the Camera Raw itself, so again I can turn that on and off. It'll take a moment just to turn it back on because it's got to re-render it. But if I need to get back into Camera Raw and work on this, all I've got to do is double click the filter, name in the layers panel here. I'm back into Camera Raw. I can make any changes that I now feel are kind of relevant. Let's just bump it up. Probably going to go a little overboard to pull back on the vibrance, maybe a touch there. And that's now going to apply those Camera Raw changes. So I've got the full power of Camera Raw inside Photoshop, which is a lovely, lovely change indeed. Now, the third thing that I want to show you for Photoshop CC is a new feature called Generator. And this has been added in to Photoshop since Photoshop CC was released. This is one of these things that we haven't had to wait for another version to come from. And the idea of this is that I can take my content from Photoshop and generate assets for use in maybe web design or other products should I need. Now, it's a feature that has to be enabled, and that's done through Edit Preferences. And in there, you can then tell it that you want the generator to actually be available. Once it's available, if you actually want Photoshop to start to generate those assets for you, then I simply go to File, into Generate, and I tick this new Image Assets command. And what that tells Photoshop is, as and when I now start to do any requisite work, start to generate the assets that I can use in those other products, in those things that I'm doing. And the way that the assets are generated is by taking the names of your layers, or maybe of the layer groups, and it uses those to generate the assets that you require. So in this case here, I've got obviously a section here for this climate icon. I'm just going to rename this group just as I normally would. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to rename it, and I'm going to add a file extension. In this case, I'm adding a PNG file extension. Because it's now got a file extension that it recognizes, Generator is now saying, right, well, you need that. You've asked me to create a file like that, and that's exactly what it will have done. And I'm just going to flick into Windows Explorer, and you can see here I've now got an assets folder named after the file I'm working on, and in there is that graphic. Okay, that's just automatic. Let's just bump that up a bit so we can see it. So now what happens is, as I make any changes to the Photoshop file, those are then actually passed through via Generator. So I can go in and I can rename another one of my layers, maybe, and that file's already there. So this is actually live. Once the generator switched on, this is live. And let's make that one maybe a JPEG just because we can. Again, that's going to take probably a moment or two because it's a big, there we go, there's the background layer already done. So these are generated on the fly as I work. And if I need to make any changes to these, then I can come in quite happily and I can make those changes. So let's just quickly change the color of that one. And there you go, you can see it's already done it. So that's the generator, Adobe generator if you like, or Photoshop generator as it's called, but generator. So if Photoshop's being used to design assets for use somewhere else, once the generator is active, just leave it sitting in the background and it'll do the rest. I'm just going to disable it for now because I don't want it to get in the way of anything else I'm doing for the rest of the demonstration. But that gives you a kind of a taste of what generator does. And I'm just going to stop showing Photoshop. So that kind of gives you a very brief taste of some of the features of Photoshop CC. And obviously, as I say, there are an awful lot more than that, but that is just to give you a taste. So we've got the generator, the algorithms, and camera raw. So that's those. But let's have a look at the other products as well. InDesign CC. Now again, there's been quite a lot of changes, but I've picked out 3 that are kind of big changes in terms of day-to-day usage and day-to-day working. One of them, unfortunately, I cannot show you it because of what it is, because it's behind the scenes, and InDesign CC is now 64-bit. So it's going to take full advantage of those newer processors, of more RAM, so it's generally going to run a lot quicker than it has in the past, but obviously that's something I can't actually show you, but it's a big, big change for InDesign. InDesign also has a new interface, so they've now given it the same sort of look and feel as some of the other products from the other versions, and in keeping with Photoshop. So you can see here that InDesign is now this kind of dark interface in keeping with the rest of the Creative Suite. So that's kind of a minor, I suppose, but the fact it's 64-bit is a big, big change. Now, I've gone for a very simple kind of feature to show you. That's a very nice feature, and Adobe have changed now how your fonts list works. So you've got this kind of search tool available, which it's an improved search, really, I suppose, kind of more than anything. As you can see, you can just start typing, and it just narrows down your font list straight away. And I'm not saying that's brand new, but it is kind of a nice thing to have. But what Adobe did find, as far as fonts are concerned, is that no matter how many fonts people have on their systems, they typically only use maybe 10 to 20 of them, something like that. So now you can mark fonts as your favorites, just with these little stars here. Really is that simple to make something a favorite font. And as you can see, I've got probably half a dozen or so, maybe something like that ticked or starred, favorited already. And that's particularly nice, and up at the top here, to have this ability to show my favorite fonts only. So rather than having to trawl up and down the list to find the fonts I want, I can mark them as a favorite no matter where they are, and I can always get them. And this isn't document specific, this is kind of InDesign specific, which is nice. And also notice that no matter whether you're dealing with favorites or all of your fonts, then your fonts are automatically grouped together, just to make it a little easier to kind of cut down some of the clutter almost that was in the font list originally. So, you know, kind of 2 or 3 very, very simple changes as far as fonts are concerned. But if we do any work with type, which obviously we're going to in InDesign, then that's going to really speed up how we do that work. So that's kind of another one for InDesign, just very simple changes, but really nice changes. The other one that I thought I would show, because it's a really nice sort of change, is a new feature InDesign now has the ability to generate QR codes directly within your InDesign documents. And obviously they could then point to whatever you want. They could point to a website. They could do whatever you decide you want them to do. So you can see here through my object menu, I've got the ability to generate a QR code, and it'll place it inside the frame that I've already built. I can equally do it through a right mouse click, and I can generate a QR code there. When you choose to generate a QR code, you can then specify what sort of QR code is it going to be. So is it going to be a hyperlink or a text message, an email, business card, things like that. I'm just going to go with a web hyperlink just as a simple example, given what this document is about. Let's go with Panasonic.co.uk/cameras. I have no idea if that's a genuine web address as such. Certainly the Panasonic.co.uk is, but let's just OK that. And there we have it. That will be a fully functioning QR code that someone with a smartphone or similar could now snap that, and it'll take them off to the website that I've nominated. So you could do that in the past by using certain plugins and add-ons, but it's nice to actually have that within InDesign. So you have the QR code generator. So again, 3 very simple things just to show you that just make life easier if we're doing a lot of work within InDesign. And again, there are lots of other changes as well. I've just picked out some of the more popular ones. So you've got things like the sync settings that I mentioned in Photoshop to copy your settings back and forth. If you're building new documents, there's a preview mode to help you deal with that. EPUBs can be generated, EPUB indexes, can be generated directly from InDesign now, and that's there's lots and lots of other things. But I just picked kind of 3 that are nice to talk about and nice to show. So I think the last product that I'm going to go through, and again, just kind of 3 features or so from this, will be Illustrator. And again, kind of 3 of the bigger features that Adobe are kind of talking about and pushing. So we've got some new transform tools. We've got some new brush commands and controls. We've got a lovely new tool for working with type, as well as the sync settings that I've mentioned before. For syncing your various settings and swatches and brushes and styles and things like that back and forth. Exporting to CSS is now supported. All sorts of new things, but again, these are just 3 kind of nice ones. So I will switch to Illustrator, and I'll show you 3 of the Illustrator features. So I'm going to deal with the brushes, I think, first. I've got a couple of artboards here, as you can see. And I'm just going to do a little bit of brush work. So I've got my standard brushes panel here, and I've designed just a little set of shapes here, which I'm going to turn into a brush, which is kind of fairly normal. Just drop this into the brushes panel, and I can choose now what type of brush, which is, again, nothing new. I'm going to build a pattern brush for this one. But what is new is that when I define a pattern brush, I now get the ability to design how that brush is actually going to look when it's used. So I'm giving this little preview here, as you can see, and Illustrator lets me now define how the different elements of that thing that I'm going to apply the brush to might look. So we can see that kind of the sides of it would look pretty much the way I've designed my brush, which is, it's fine, that's what I would expect. Illustrator's chosen what it wants to do as far as the corners are concerned, which is okay maybe for these 3. I might be happy with that, but this one certainly looks a little odd. So I can go to this inner corner, as it's termed here, and I can get to decide what do I want that particular corner to look like. So I don't have to do lots of kind of redesigning and things like that. I can just simply pick how I want my inner corners to look like. But equally, I can come back to these and say, well, actually, I want my outer corners to look like that. So I actually get to choose how those corners and those intersections are actually going to work, which is a really nice idea. So if I now was just to quickly pop in a quick path, let's put this back to nothing. And then apply my brush to it, you can see it quite happily does what I've asked on that. So it makes, building brushes that are going to have to follow corners and things like that much easier to control, much easier to manage if that's what I decide I want to do. So that's kind of one of the new kind of features of Illustrator CC. One of the other ones that's new and certainly massively improved is the ability now to take embedded artworks. This is just a photo of it that's been worked on in Photoshop and then dropped into Illustrator, to turn this into a brush, but then I can control again how that brush is actually going to be used. So in this case I'm going to build an art brush because of what I've got here. Now what would kind of typically happen normally is if I was to then apply that brush to a path, is the brush is then going to potentially distort based on the path that I've drawn. And we can see here I can control how is this actually going to be used. So Illustrator just chosen it thinks I want to work from top to bottom, but equally I could work from bottom to top. So again, it's how am I going to be drawing the path that this is going to be applied to. You can see that what it will automatically do is it would stretch this to fit the path that I'm going to actually apply that stroke to. What's really nice is I can tell it to stretch only between the guides that I pick. So I can actually position these where I want. So I can say to Illustrator, when I apply this, feel free, stretch this bit, stretch kind of the stem, the leaves and so on, but don't stretch the actual flower head itself. So I'll just quickly pop in there you go. So a quick brush. I've applied that brush to it, and as you can see, it stretched the parts that I said it was allowed to stretch, but the actual flower head and the petals haven't changed. So that's kind of one of the nice things about how the brushes have changed. So you've got this ability to control the corners and the intersections, and also if you're building art brushes, to control how they work. Just kind of a couple of quick things as far as brushes are concerned. One of the nice things they've brought in with Illustrator CC is a new tool that they call the Touch Type tool. And what this allows me to do is to apply kind of effects and change how my type looks without having to break it down into its component parts. So if I wanted to work on individual pieces of this type previously, I wanted to rotate them or pick them up and stretch them and things like that, I'd actually have to break that apart and it would no longer be a piece of type. It would just be a series of shapes, as it were, that I could work with. But with CC, I can now get hold of the individual characters here, and I can work on these, and I can do what I want with them. But the original, this is still a piece of perfectly normal, fully editable type, if that's what I want to do. As you can see, I can just pick them up and move them around. I can do whatever I need, but this is still fully editable if that's what I want to do. So I can still go back and I can grab my type tool and I can work on this if I need to. You can see it's perfectly normal type. I can go in and recolor it and change its fonts and everything that I might want to do. But it allows me to apply those effects without having to break it down into its component parts. I just do whatever I feel is necessary. So it makes those kind of special effects with text significantly quicker and easier to apply. And again, potentially is going to save an awful lot of time and an awful lot of effort for working with type in Illustrator. So they have it, again, just three really quick things for Illustrator, the new brushes and the touch type tools, so there's a couple of things, the brushes and the touch type as well. But there are lots and lots of other things, as I say. So you have it, kind of 3 nice things, shall we say, about each of the products, or those 3 products, just to kind of give you a taste of some of the things that the Creative Cloud brings in terms of features over and above just extra products and things like that. So if you decide you need some more information about training courses with us here at QA on Creative Cloud or CS5, CS6 even maybe, then this is where you need to be looking. So qa.com/Adobe is where you'll find it on our website. You can email us, info@qa.com. There's the phone number as well. If you're already a QA customer, then get in touch with your QA account manager. So you have it. There's a fairly short presentation and a demo of some of the features of Creative Cloud. So if you've got any questions, feel free. If you can pop them into the chat window and address them to all the panelists, and I'll be more than happy to answer any questions that I can. But hopefully that's been a useful little session for you.
Thank you, Richard. I see we have a question from Evelyn, who she's asked, please advise on the minimum spec on the graphics card required for these enhancements.
Good question. Off the top of my head, I can't tell you. It's not a figure I've got smack in my mind, but I can certainly get that for you. I will just jump onto Adobe's website. They are all there. I know for some of the real heavy-duty enhancements in Photoshop, in particular, some of the 3D stuff and things like that, they say that you need to have a graphics card. The machine I'm sat at the moment has, I think, a 256 meg graphics card, and as you can see, it's running those quite happily. But I don't know what the actual minimum spec figure is off the top of my head. But you should find that a dedicated graphics card should do the job. I do have a second machine that I run my Creative Suite stuff on, and that doesn't have a dedicated graphics card. It just takes some of the RAM from the PC itself, and that runs a little sluggish occasionally, but it does run and it does work. So as I say, I'll try and get the exact figure for you. It's just typically the internet has now decided to go a bit slow. But certainly the ones that I've shown you today, to my knowledge, don't require anything in particular in terms of, you've got to have a graphics card for them to work sort of thing. As I say, I use them on my other machines, which doesn't have them.
Thanks. And we have another question from David Crane, who's asking, if we have users with existing CS6 installed, can they interchange files with additional users who we purchase CC4?
As far as I'm aware, yes, you can. I run CS6 and CC, certainly on the machine that I'm currently sat at now. My other machine has CS5, CS6 and CC running on it, and I've had no real issues transferring files back and forth. To the best of my knowledge, CC and CS6 use the exact same file format. Certainly as far as InDesign is concerned, I know there are issues with some of the CS5 to CS6 on InDesign, but I'm not aware of any of CS6 to CC. So yeah, should be fine to swap your files back and forth as far as I'm aware. I've not had any issues. I'm not aware of any issues.
Okay, that's all the questions then, I think. So thank you everybody for logging in. And as I said earlier, you will receive a recording and all slides. Thank you, and I hope you've enjoyed the session.
Thanks so much, everyone.